I think archiving data, learning from the past experiences, so important. We have a lot of data, but how to turn the data into the knowledge, wisdom, insight, which help us to make decisions for preparations, investment to the long futures. So I think how to turn the huge data as an asset into the meaningful, legible information is an exciting, also very critical challenge. Today, we have a very great three panelists in my session. So first, I'd like to introduce Jake Poet. Jake, are you here? Yes. He's the founders and also executive directors of DataKind, an organization that brings together leading data scientists with high-impact social organizations to better collect, analyze, and visualize data in the service of humanity. So next, also panelist is Wei Sun Lee. He's a Deputy Executive Secretary of National Science and Technology Center for Disaster Reductions. And since 2000, he's responsible for international collaborations on disaster risk reductions. Then third, I'd like to introduce Professor Fumihiko Inamura from Tohoku University. Yeah, and he's also studying about simulation, like for tsunami warning, and also human science for evacuation process. So now I'd like to start with the presentations of Jake.
Sure.
And I think it's my seat. So.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. You're important.
I'll go over there.
Yes, after my talk, yeah.
Overstepping my bounds already. Thank you so much. It is a huge honor to be here amongst so many people doing so many great things in disaster preparedness. I want to tell you guys a little bit about what I've been doing for the past year, which is a little bit outside of the disaster realm. So I want to start by asking everyone to think about the ways that data is actually touching your lives every day, not just in a crisis. So for example, if you've gone to get a movie in the past, you probably didn't go to a movie store, right? You went here to Netflix, which recommended a movie for you. Or if you went to figure out how to travel, you probably used Google Maps instead of an old guidebook. Yeah, data is driving all of our decisions every day, from how we get places, to what products we decide to buy, to even who we decide to be friends with. And this is all a very exciting time because all of this data that's being created by every interaction we have with each other, whether through a computer or through a cell phone, means that we have vast archives of data that can be mined to help us make better decisions about how to live our lives. Now, that's very exciting, but if you think about where most of the efforts are going in data analysis and statistics, the vast majority are to things like this: picking movies, finding friends, buying products, things that make our very comfortable lives ever so slightly more comfortable. And it seems that if we have access to all this data, we should be doing more with it than just making sure that when you all leave here today, you know exactly where to go to get the cheapest deal on an iPad. Now, I'm from the data world, so I work with people like this, data scientists. I know a lot of the people in this room are as well. And if you are, you're probably very excited because you know that these people don't just work with data in their day jobs. These people work on data all the time, 9 to 5. Increasingly, people are becoming involved in things called hackathons. Raise your hand if you've been to a hackathon. Okay, a few people. So for the uninitiated, a hackathon is a weekend event where developers and data people get together and just try to come up with cool stuff. And this is exciting because they're not just doing this through a company, they're sitting in rooms together like this, working out products. So I remember going to my first hackathon and being so excited because I thought, this is how we're going to make change. This is how we can actually analyze all this data to do really important things in the world. We'll get together, we're going to make things that are going to make positive change and have impact and change the world. And what we came up with was really unfulfilling. A lot of what the people were coming up with were apps to help you park your car or apps to help you find local deals, and that felt to me to be a little bit disappointing. So thankfully, there are people like you guys out there, people in the social sector, who are collecting data from crises, collecting data when there are problems in the world. And as you know, a lot of these social organizations are awash in data, right? There's data coming in from the field, there's data coming in from maps, there's data about resources, and more than that, there's groups like Ushahidi, the World Bank, governments making huge archives of data available to groups like the UN, the Red Cross, other groups like that. But the problem is they don't necessarily have people to help them work with it, right? So all that great potential to help them analyze it and understand what's going on gets lost. So we wanted to connect the people who knew what to do with data, the statisticians and analysts who weren't at research universities, but at places like Google and Amazon, with the people who had lots of data but didn't know what to do with it. And that was why we founded DataKind, this nonprofit, to connect people who had that part-time energy, to connect them to these social causes. And I'll give you some examples of what this looks like. In the United States, the New York Civil Liberties Union is a group that looks out for human rights in New York. And they wanted to understand if the police were being fair, if they were using racial discrimination. And what's cool about this problem is there's a big archive of data about all police activities in New York. So they had data available, and they had a good question. But the problem they had was that this is the data. And if you're a nonprofit or a social group, what do you do with this? Right? You've got all the data that's come in, but now what? So they worked with volunteers from DataKind over a weekend, and they came up with this instead. This is a map that shows the number of stops that police are making in New York by district based on race. And so now they can start to see things. They can start to focus in on various hotspots in New York and say, oh, we need to understand what's going on here. So this helped them turn that mess of data into something they could use. Now, another group is the Grameen Foundation. They have a wonderful program in Africa where they're bringing information to subsistence farmers via cell phone. So subsistence farmers don't know what weather conditions will be like. They don't know what the crop prices are in the town next door. So Grameen Foundation brings people in with cell phones to ask them to do queries, to say, what do you want to know, to help bring them information. They have all this cell phone information now that could help them do their jobs better, but it also looks like this. They didn't even know who the good workers were, whether they were having an impact. So again, they built a visualization with our team that shows the worker skill breakdown. And the way to interpret this map is that the good workers are showing up in blue across the rows, and places where workers are falling short is in the yellow area. Now, there's a lot of question about how to judge goodness, but what this helped them do is look into that data and learn more. And lastly, I'll close by showing the United Nations Global Pulse is a fantastic group, collects data from all around the world so they can help find evidence of humanitarian crises before they happen. They did a great survey called the Global Wellbeing Survey. They asked everyone around the world by cell phone, how happy are you? It was a great advance in mobile technology, but the result, again, is data like this, that they didn't even know how to use to get the basic questions on who responded to the survey. So they worked with volunteers to build this visualization that showed how people responded over time across the globe. And this helped them see where they had reached, which countries they'd missed, and where they needed to do more. Now, we've seen lots of mapping today. A lot of people in this room have these skills, and so you may say, this is very straightforward. And you're right. It is very straightforward. Ushahidi could do this like instantaneously. But what's interesting is that if you are a social group or a nonprofit, you don't necessarily have these skills. There's this question about when you have this archive of data, who has the expertise to apply statistical analysis to it? And that's something that we don't have a lot of options for in the data science world and are trying to bring together. So as Lou from World Vision came with a request this morning to say, we'd like to know, can we federate out these tasks? Can we say when we have an archive of data, how do we get people to look at it? I'm coming with the reverse question. We have groups of people who are really good at doing this but don't have a lot of ways to connect to this. So I'd like to know with your groups, when you have disaster data, or when you're trying to use this data to do more than just map it, how can we work with you guys? We want to bridge that gap so that we can do more with this data than just figure out how to find movies, but actually figure out how we can help change the world. So thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you for my chair and also the great visualization examples. Yeah.
No problem. Thanks.
So now,
good afternoon. I'm Wei-Sen Lee from National Science and Technical Center for Disaster Reduction. Actually, disaster is not a new thing to Taiwan. Like earthquake, like the typhoon, like flash flood, like landslide, like the debris flow, it happens almost every day. Since the 1999, we think we had a lot of investment, both about money and human resource on disaster reduction and improvement of emergency response. We think we have done something, but about 3 years ago, 2009, Typhoon Miracle teaches us something new. As we know, in disaster management, we always say we learn from disaster, but we also learn from failures. From the Typhoon Miracle, we learn something new. Traditionally, we think about isolated area, we think maybe it's no transportation, but in this case, we found information and communication is also important for the isolated area because some area during Typhoon Miracle lost contact for several days, but these are the most affected area during Typhoon Miracle. This is something we're going to look at. About 700 people get killed, and this as one of top 10 events in 2009. But what we found from Typhoon Miracle, first, we have a lot of system during Typhoon Miracle period, but the problem we don't have system of system. If commander want to know if the shelter is safe enough from flood, sorry, he have to compare two graphs together. They cannot overlap two layers together because at that time we don't have the system of integration. So the problem is we need information integration system. And the second one, we have a lot of emergency responders try to fill a lot of form, try to report back to the emergency operations center, but most are in text form. They cannot transform into geospatial information. Although we want to help, after we re-examine the data, it's impossible to do it in a very short period of time. So we try to talk to the emergency responder, why give us a basic information about geospatial distribution like the address? So it's the turning point for us. Gradually, our government agreed to have information integration on the national platform. But my center, NCDR, we are not a government official. We just the government hired scientists to do the job. At the very first beginning, it's not an easy job. As we knock the door, say, if we want to open the gate, information gate with NCDR, of course, the answer is no. Why? So from our observation, there are two challenges to overcome. First, about mutual trust. They don't trust us at the very first beginning. Second, they are afraid of openness. They are afraid if the data open, maybe something bad happened to them. So how about have the solution to solve the problem? We proposed two ways. First, be their friend, be their partner. So we spent several years to spend time together with a lot of government agencies to build our mutual trust. Second, we need top-down determination. Our vice premier instructed all the government agencies have to open the gate to NCDR. So recently in my center, we tried to integrate about the information, totally about 120 big data set generated by 20 government agencies. But we are not in charge of maintaining or try to build up some hardware because we try to have information integration. So we spend a lot of time talking about the protocol, talk about the transformation way, and also talking about some security thing. So how we use the data during the emergency, especially for typhoons, we receive a lot of big data set. For example, this information from Central Weather Bureau, CWB. Further thing, we transform the big data into some model parameters. So we can predict about the precipitation. Based on the precipitation, we know the flood potential and the landslide potential. And most important thing, the obvious achievement in the recent since the 2001 is we try to decrease the death toll. Apparently in 2010, one could claim about death toll over 200. Of course, we had another one in 2009, Typhoon Miracle. But we found the result. We do decrease the number of death toll and also by the measure of the evacuations. This example, right after Typhoon Miracle, why the big data is so useful for early evacuation. After Typhoon Miracle, we have definition of early evacuation, two criteria. First, in daytime. Second, no traffic problem. We don't want the evacuee and emergency responder risk their life for evacuation. This example, when Typhoon Fanabi was approaching to southern part of Taiwan, the Lai village already suffered something after Typhoon Miracle. You can see the picture at your left-hand side. So on the date of the September 16th in the afternoon, 3 p.m., we issue the evacuation order about 32 hours ahead of the debris flow happened. The debris flow covered 50 more households. If people still in the village, we cannot imagine the consequence. And think about how to use the public-private partnership to have information dissemination. If you have a chance to visit Taiwan, you will see a lot of convenience stores around the corner, along the street. We probably have 10,000 convenience stores island-wide and 5,000 owned by the 7-Eleven. So our Water Resource Agency reached a consensus with 7-Eleven. First, you see the screen. Use their LCD panel at cashier to disseminate some local weather features. This is one thing. Another thing is if any flood happens, especially in the urban area, the 7-Eleven will tell us about the flood situation. It's kind of a two-way communication. This is another solution. We try to not use the big data, but also collect some social data. And how to use the big data first become the open data. Most important thing, some personal and actionable information. Traditional, we think about some early warning system. We use a lot of model, we use a lot of big data, but we can predict the hazards is only. It's enough, not enough. So we add more social vulnerability so we can predict the impact, but it's still good for government side, not good for any person. So about the human-centered early warning system, we have added more social information. This is why we have collaborated with NGO, try to make the prediction can for reaction, can for response, not just tell you, oh, you are in danger, but like nearby, there is shelter. Please go to the shelter as soon as possible. So this is the direction in Taiwan we're going to use from big data to open data, and in the future for the personal information. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing us about the challenge to make data really open, available to everybody. So now I'd like to ask Professor Inamura to talk about data.
Thank you very much. This is Imamura from Tohoku University. It's great for me to provide you the idea of the new archive for the 2011 earthquake tsunami in Tohoku. This is the slide. You can see the name of the archive, which is the Michinoku Shinroku-den, meaning the name of the Michinoku is the old or former Tohoku area. We use the old names because we try to compile not only the 2011 event, but also the past over the 1,000 or 2,000 years on the historical literature. And Shinroku-den means the earthquake and tsunami related, the recorded system, and we would like to transfer this data to the other people in the world. So, and we just developed this archive project in the new research institute of Tohoku University, which name is International Research Institute of Disaster Sciences. So consists of not only engineer scientists, but also for the natural, but also social science involved in the new research institute, and also medical member from the school also joined. So it is very unique. So this is the idea of the total archive in Michinoku. So we try to collect all kinds of data related to the damage, hazard, and the impact before and after 2011. Sorry, this is Japanese, but you can see the many ideas through the Chinese characters. So we have many video data, picture data in the digital format, but also many oral data from the residential people along the coast. And in order to collect this kind of data, we open the system and with 4 purposes. The one of purposes is to understand the mechanism of the huge earthquake tsunami in 2011, which had never recorded in Japan. Even though we have many historical events of the earthquake tsunami, but we never have such a large earthquake, more than magnitude 9. So we try to understand what happened, and we should propose new mechanism of the huge earthquake and tsunami. And the second purpose is to support the mitigation effort to other areas. For example, west part of Japan, we are expecting another earthquake and tsunami in Tokai to Nankai, so which probability is still very high. So third purpose is to support also some practical mitigation for the people in the affected area and staffs in the town and the prefectures. And the fourth purpose is to transfer this kind of data for long time. So we collect this kind of data with specific formatted, and we try to record as long as possible. So this is the image of the system. You can see the system in the center. So we need input and output system. Especially output system should be related with some affected area, especially people and some government and some official people. So we get many information from them, and also we should return back to some result and some knowledge or lesson to them. So we have the input and output system, but it's very much collected. So this is skip, and I would like to show you some example which already collected in the archive, but you can see here, okay. So this is the example of the available data in the website already. So one of them is the field data about damaged area for the earthquake tsunami. So we can estimate some damaged area through satellite or aerial photo. But at the same time, we need to go to the site or field to make sure that some houses are completely destroyed or partially destroyed. So we are collecting such kind of data on the field as well as some available satellite or aerial photo, aerial data. And the second one is the trend analysis to provide us what keywords in the news are now significant or not according to the time. So we put the trend analysis in the archive system. And of course, we are many experts to make a simulation which can be used for the direct prediction for the earthquake tsunami damages. So we are now collecting all kinds of data for the predictions. So, and one of our unique system is, is here showing. We are collecting the many data from the many digital system or other major data. But sometimes we need some data from the site, which we cannot expect. So that's why we requested the people to go to the site. So any kind of information or some experiences from victims or people in affected area should be collected. So that's why we have the team of collecting the data, which are survivors and some retired people in the city and the prefecture, including the other area. So now we are collecting the big variety of the data which we cannot expect. So for example, some survival experiences from the people affected. So this is the example of the archive data. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Inamura Sensei. How many of you seen the stone monument in Tohoku areas about 300 saying the message, don't build a house below this line height? How many of you seen it? Okay, there are many earthquakes, tsunami in Tohoku areas, in Meiji, also Showa. People try to archive, then disseminate that idea to the next generations, but have kept fading. So it's very impressive to see all the data, but how you can make an engine mechanism to remind them, for example. For me, like a Twitter bot is a great example, which reminds you. So data is great, but how to make future people, our descendants, make good use of those data? First question to you.
Thank you very much. So one of purpose in our archive is collect the available digital data right now. And it can be installed into the computer. But this kind of data sometimes cannot available or cannot inform to the people who are interested in the prevention or mitigation. So we are now putting this kind of data into the digital museum system, AR. So whenever people go to the affected area, we can access this data on the site. So when we can go, already the damaged area cleaned up, but we can see such kind of data through some AR system.
Thank you. So Jake, it's very impressive to see all the data, but also talents, experts who can analyze the data, extract the meanings, also visualize. Especially, I'm a big fan of the big news, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Wall Street Journals, all those amazing visualizations. And, but also this abstraction really requires the talent. Towards the future, how people can make good use of this technique, because many things changes, but still they want to understand how we can use the lessons we learned this century in a very different context. To do so, just data and visualization might be not enough. How to help people think using a more abstract model. So how to go beyond from data to the model to think with some set of the parameters which future people can tweak to make a decision?
I think it's a very good question, how to think about data in a way that will be able to be tweaked by future generations is a big question. And I think a lot of it actually comes down to some questions of data literacy. We're running into a problem right now where data is exploding and the people who understand how to use it, or even the public to think about it, is not growing as quickly.
Yes, I understand.
And I think that's something that you're starting to see bridged now with people coming up with data science programs or looking at ways to educate data scientists so that we could build systems that could be used towards the future. But I think right now we're sort of in the situation where we're trying to bridge that gap with the people who know what to do with it now and apply those skills to that data now. But you're totally right. A visualization that's just a static result of this data isn't going to be relevant maybe in the next generation. And we really need people who can take that data and make sense of it so that future generations can look back and understand that a little bit better.
Maybe there's a lot of the emphasis on the data, but only when data is abstracted based on understanding of, for example, causality chain, then transform into system dynamics or event-driven simulation, then future people may have more usage than the past data of the reference. So maybe data science should also evolve, analyzing, abstracting the mechanism, say causality chain, then tie into the simulation analytical models to augment the human brains.
That sounds fantastic. If you know how to do it, let's do it together. That would be great.
Thank you. Yes. Also, Wendy, thank you very much for talking about the challenge to become a friend to the government, get data. But what's prevent government? Why they hesitate to release the data? I can think many reasons, but I'm curious. What's your...
That's a major challenge to them.
Yes, why they are afraid of, or they don't want to be responsible for something because of noise, or what would...
I think the first thing, most government officials, they are afraid of mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
Since they found mistakes, since they are in the guilty. So the people were challenging if they do good job good enough. So I first think afraid of mistake.
I see.
The second thing sometimes is a huge job, especially when you try to maintain the data. Right now, I mean a data set, not just build up once. We need frequently update, think about the resolution. So it's also a huge job. Sometimes they consider about the budget. They are also reluctant to do furthermore about how to improve the data. I think the two major reasons.
I see. Maybe if they believe data must be perfect, otherwise they can release. That really prevent us from making good use of. So any data has a noise. We should accept this noise. Then, but you said also good enough to make some decision. So it's something very important, new value systems. Many people try to pursue perfect data. It never exists.
Yep.
Well, and if I could jump in on that note, I'm curious if you've seen this way, Sun, where there are cases where private companies can fill in some of that data that's good enough in place of governments.
Good enough.
You know, we're seeing cases where, Google, for example, right, is able to see search trends for terms that signal a recession coming up.
Yes.
Whereas in the US, the government only puts out a survey from the Bureau of Labor Statistics about recessions. So it might be monthly, but maybe even annually. So if there are places where companies who have all this data they're collecting just by people using it could somehow make those archives available as replacements maybe to some government data, I wonder if that's something you're seeing as well, or think there's promise in.
And the Japan case, the Japanese government before the 2011 hesitated to provide many
I remember.
hazard analysis. But this time we failed to predict for the earthquake tsunami with the very large scale, even though some researcher pointed out some possibility, but which is still discussing on the some availability. But now Japanese government shift to the more open this kind of the information, and they try to evaluate the maximum scenario, which might be useful for the future prediction.
That's encouraging. Also, Wei in his slides has a word predict 3 times, which I like it. Not just learning from the past, but using data as an engine, maybe as a models or decision tree to help people make a decision. So I think a predict for the futures, also choosing the best actions of crisis response seems very important. We talk about potential noise of the bug in the data. This clock says 15 minutes, but I don't believe I do have still 15 minutes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe it's nice time to open the discussion to the floor, because I think I have less time for my session. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, any questions or comments to these experts? Okay, the gentleman in the first row. Please identify yourself. And,
hello, my name is Gisli Olofsson from NetHope. We've been collecting a lot of data, as risk data and about hazards. We saw both what you were showing, Wei-san, as well as Margareta was showing us earlier. One thing is to make sense of the data for us, but how can we take it a step further and take all that data, all that knowledge that we have now collected or are collecting, and present it in a better way to the people so that they actually make actionable change in their behaviors or decide to do the evacuations when we're telling them that. Can we use things like, more, data scientists that can take the data, not just create a fancy map, but actually help us take that then and create storytelling that explains that to people in words they understand. And that's to all of you.
I like the term actionable change. So who wants to take this question?
Well, I'll start by saying that's a fantastic question. It's something that a lot of groups, nonprofit and otherwise, are wrestling with. We've got this data. We know a little bit about what to do with it ourselves, but how do we present it to the world to actually make a change?
Yes.
And it's, of course, the classic problem, even before big data ever came on the scene. But certainly there are, you mentioned a very important word, storytelling. A lot of groups are very interested now in how to take that data and make it compelling. Where they may have previously put out a graph or a spreadsheet, now there's this question, could we use an infographic or an interactive to get people involved. And I think you're seeing a lot more of that actually succeed. So Kiva recently put out their last report, which instead of being just a write-up, was a huge interactive site where you could look at where all the money had gone, where it had come from. Now that was to reflect on them. That's not quite getting to the point that Gisli's mentioning, which is how do you then let people make decisions around this and actually act on this? And this is something that I don't know if there's an easy answer for, but obviously my soapbox is that you should team with some statisticians to build some of those decisions and build some of those interactives that people could use. But I think increasingly that's something we're going to need to answer as a group, is how can we actually get this out there in a way that people are going to act on? And I feel like I'm sort of just rephrasing your question, so maybe that's more indication that we're figuring that out, and I think that's what the people in this room are figuring out. So I'll weigh in with an answer after I think a bit more about it, but it's a very common problem.
Yeah, it is also a very great question. So I can say that the experiences and lessons in the past should be carefully shared with other people with different conditions. Because we have the case of the 2011, it occurred March and afternoons. If it occurred in another place and another time, some effect might be changed. So we can put a kind of prediction with simulation and some experiences. So those are very, very, I hope, affect to some people, but not sure there's some good system. Still we are doing.
According to my experience at Typhoon Morocco, I found the knowledge transfer kind of evolution process and interactive ways. How they say? I mentioned in my PowerPoint about early evacuation. To people living on the plain area seems to be a good idea, but think about people living in the mountain area, especially our indigenous tribe, they don't think it's a good idea. So after they receive new knowledge, they think maybe we can find some emerging shelter near my village. So the kind of the interactive process, because we give them some knowledge, they think about, yes, I understand the risk, let's change our behavior. But like Gisli asked, who is best storyteller? I think it's not from government official, should be the NGOs. NGO can have the long-term accompany with affected people. So in our process, we try to train some NGO, try to use our science and technology transfer into spoken language, no use a lot of those scientific terms. So during the knowledge transfer, how to make our knowledge actionable and accessible is also very important.
I think Wei-san made a really good point. I want to just add on very quickly, I apologize, which is that everyone talks about data and big data as if it is the new key, right? But it's just an extension of a lot of what we've already done, what we've done in the past. We've always collected data. It's just that there's more of it available. So if you want to change people's behavior, go back to the ways that NGOs and other groups are already changing their behavior and use the data to back it up. But nothing intrinsically, no infographic or story you can pull just from the data is going to do that on its own. So I like that point.
Next question or comments? Yeah.
My name is from Tanaka from Sendai. I'm a developer. In the Taiwanese case, before 30x something, people were able to evacuate. Maybe in Japan, it's unlikely for us to evacuate at such an early timing. So what kind of power did you utilize in that case? So could you just elaborate more?
He was surprised with
It's about early evacuation.
Yes, early Satya was how this could happen.
Yes, first, because we use some story like the risk communication is very important. So people aware of the dangers right after Typhoon Morocco because still a lot of debris in the mountain area. So how to do the evacuation first? The local village should have consensus. It's a very important thing. Second, you must prepare for everything, especially people don't want to be evacuated. So in the process, we will ask our military sector prepare vehicles to transport all the indigenous people to the shelter. But the problem is sometimes they stay too long in the shelter, they will complain because their poverty, their livestock, the crops in the mountain. So we must find the balancing point. What is the best period for people in the shelter and how to active the system for the evacuation is both important.
Thank you. Last question?
Yes, thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Michael Ernst. I'm with USAID, Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistance, and I'm very impressed with the presentations today and all of them, especially this panel's. And the thing that comes to mind for me, we do a lot of work at the community level, especially focused on community-based disaster risk reduction. I was very impressed with the earlier presentation about how communities can handle their own data. For me, being involved in the field, it really comes down to communities being able to get access to this technology and understand their risk. And you've talked about a lot of the big data sets that they might be able to access. But a lot of what has to happen somehow is that the communities get used to this in normal times, so that's a part of the tools that they use, and then they can access what these larger data sets, and in fact, contribute to them. In fact, the community can be the source for your data and your larger big data sets. The thing that we worry about on the disaster side often is if communities are left out, and that has come out from a lot of these presentations. So really, one of the things that is a strong interest for us is how to engage the private sector, the public sector, the NGOs, and the communities themselves so that they're the ones that are empowered and are in fact the ones that are controlling the response to some level, and how we can get governments and everyone to agree to coordinate in support of those needs at the community level.
I think about the community level, they need to prepare before the disaster happens. Because during the disaster moment, I think it's impossible for them to access a lot of big data. So how to build out the plan? In our case, of course, once we depend on NGOs. So the trainer policy, we train the NGO to help local community. But during the process, two elements should be emphasized. Respect local knowledge and local experience, very also important. Don't think advanced technology is only a solution. Sometimes respect local knowledge and local experience.
Yeah, I agree. So I agree. So the data or archive provide the old data, so which can be analyzed by the community with the experiences and the purposes. So sometimes the purpose of the community are diverse. So different discussion with different purposes. So we need a kind of arrangement to use. So the key person might be very necessary, I think.
And I completely agree with what Wei Sun said earlier about needing the communities to be that bridge. You know, we have lots of people excited to look at the data who do that every day, but don't know the cultural conditions, the situation on the ground, which is why it's so important to partner with the advocacy groups and communities who are doing this already. And you mentioned an interesting point of training people in this technology ahead of time or being prepared for this. And I think one way I've seen an interesting solution to that are the groups who are inverting that and taking technology and communication that already exists and piggybacking on those cultural norms. So in Africa, there's a program called Text Me Back, where if you run out of cell phone minutes, you can send a message to your friend saying, hey, I'm out of money on my cell phone, but I can text you to say, call me. And that's something that's very culturally common there. And so a group started adding information about where they could get HIV testing at the bottom of those texts. They teamed with the telcos, they teamed with that community to get that message out via technology that was already used. Now that's not an immediate crisis, but they found when they did that, the amount of people going and getting HIV testing skyrocketed. So there was an interesting use of not saying, how do we train people up and learning about this technology to go find HIV testing centers? They instead used technologies they already used and added that information into it. So I think that's I really like those examples of people using those techniques, and I think you need the communities engaged and the public advocacy groups to know how to do that.
Okay, that sounds great. So thank you very much for all the participation of the audience and also 3 panelists.
Thank you.